As being a part of the UN, the United States agreed to this Declaration of Human Rights, and in the process agreed to not subject any person to torture. Also, the 8th Amendment of the Constitution states the federal government may not carry out cruel and unusual punishment. The Constitution is aimed at the protection of the rights of Americans, and, as America founded itself on the principle of the equality of all men, these rights are not to be extended to people of all nationalities and religion. Any violation of these rights or unfair treatment of another human being degrades the moral fiber of American terrorism. Furthermore, Part 1, Articles 3, 5 of the Geneva Convention explicitly pronounce that any form of cruel treatment, violence to a life or a person, murder, mutilation, and torture to any prisoner of war or detained person is prohibited. The Bybee-Mebel of 2002, created by the United States Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, stated that waterboarding was a method of interrogation that was acceptable, and several accounts have proven America's use of this method. So, has America, by waterboarding, done nothing to violate any international doctrine? This is where the issue of waterboarding becomes controversial. The Bush administration said that America does not torture, and yet under the Bush administration, waterboarding was being performed as a part of enhanced interrogation for national security purposes. But the question is raised, is waterboarding torture? We spoke with Chris Hitchens, a reporter that waterboarded himself in order to see how the process was like and what it pertains to in his life.
First off, can you explain what waterboarding is?
Certainly. Waterboarding is a type of torture in which a victim is strapped down on their head and poured over their faces, and their nose and their mouth. Waterboarding is supposed to stimulate the feeling of drowning, but in reality, it feels like you are drowning. It is a potentially dangerous activity in which the participant can receive serious and permanent physical, emotional, and psychological injuries, even death, including injuries in the head and including injuries and death due to the respiratory and neurological systems of the body. Wow. Now, I understand you were waterboarded and you wrote your article in the Vanity Fair about your experience. What was that like? Well, I wrote all about my experiences in an article titled, "Believe Me, It's Torture." In the article, I explained that while being waterboarded, you feel that you are drowning because you are drowning, or rather being drowned, albeit slowly and under controlled conditions, and at the mercy, or otherwise, of those who are applying the pressure. The board is the instrument, not the method. You are not being boarded. This was very rapidly brought home to me when, on top of the hood, which still admitted a few flashes of random and worrying strobe lights in my vision, 3 layers of enveloping tower added. In this pregnant darkness, head downward, I waited for a while until I abruptly felt a slow cascade of water going up my nose. The inhalation brought the damp cloths tight against my nostrils, as if a huge, wet paw had been suddenly and annihilatingly clamped over my face. Unable to determine whether I was breathing in or out, and flooded more with the sheer panic and with mere water, I triggered the prearranged signal and felt the unbelievable relief of being pulled upright and having the soaking and stifling layers pulled off of me. I don't want to tell you how little time I lasted. Sounds horrific. Do you believe waterboarding is torture? Along with other members of the media who have undergone this process, I believe it's torture.
Oh, thank you for your time and lay off those crazy pills.
Hitchens, like other writers, radio hosts, and members of the media that have undergone waterboarding, all have agreed that waterboarding is torture. Assuming that waterboarding can be defined as torture, which according to the aforementioned expert accounts is a fair assumption, America's practice of this method has clear and obvious moral implications on the country, and of independence defines unalienable rights endowed to all men. America broke away from England on the premise that the rights they advocated for should not be isolated to their specific cause, but instead are natural rights given to all men. Loosely interpreted, the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness could imply the immorality of torture. The American Constitution, however, more clearly defines the issue. In the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, cruel and unusual punishment is prohibited. Those who believe that torture is beneficial to America's well-being would say to this that the American Constitution applies to only American citizens. However, given that the Constitution was intended as a way for democracy to take hold in America, and that Americans of formative years of American history, as well as Americans of today, believe that democracy is an ideal to be striven for by all nations, the rights of the Constitution must be made available to all people and nations. Otherwise, America will continue to lose its position as a city on a hill and become known for vice and hypocrisy. Nevertheless, the pure pragmatist may believe that torture is justifiable for America's national security. In actuality, the information given by a victim of torture will often just be an imitation of what the interrogator wishes to hear, and therefore will lead the war on terror in wrong directions, ultimately undermining the whole effort. The moral problems, too, will have a negative impact on national security. Waterboarding acts as a proponent of terrorism, not repellent. Terrorist organizations are fueled by America's apparent belief of being above the law of the Geneva Accords and its foreign policy. When America loses its moral high ground, terrorists can point out the hypocrisy of American culture to underscore the immorality of America. Wanda Sykes provided an apt comedic analogy for torture in a stand-up routine at the White House Correspondents Association's dinner on May 9, 2000.
Dick Cheney is trying to defend torture. Trying to defend torture. He goes, yeah, well, they should release the memos to show all that good information we got from our practices. You can't defend torture. That's like me robbing a bank and then going in front of the judge and saying, yes, Your Honor, I robbed the bank, but look at all these bills I paid.
In fact, Dennis Blair, the National Intelligence Director, stated, "The information gained from these techniques was valuable in some instances, but there is no way of knowing whether the same information could have been obtained through other means. The bottom line in these techniques have hurt our image around the world. The damage they have done to our interests far outweighed whatever benefit they gave us, and they are not essential to our national
Absolute
security."
highest importance that America does not continue to torture as a response to terrorism. Waterboarding clearly falls under the definition of torture. However, the definition of torture really is just arguing semantics. Waterboarding is perceived as torture to those who have experienced it especially, and the Middle East in general. Whether we as Americans define it as torture or enhanced interrogation really does not matter. In the eye of the world, America is violating the Geneva Convention and its own fundamental principles. By torturing, America makes itself more and more morally vulnerable. No longer will we be able to take up the position of the city on a hill. No longer will we be able to fight with one of our most powerful weapons, the moral high ground. The war against terror without this weapon cannot be won. Thank you. And when we come back, are poodles the cure for cancer? Stay tuned.